Thank you, Ryan. Well, let's see, the goal of our panel is to give the landowner perspective of living with a conservation easement. And each member of the panel has been involved in negotiating easements and living with their easement after the fact. And so the idea is to try to educate you guys as to what it's like to live with an easement and what issues may arise between a land trust and a landowner. Our panel members include Derek Freeman, who sold a conservation easement to the Katy Prairie Conservancy on 900 acres in 2005. Harvey Laas, who sold a conservation easement on 910 acres to NRCS in 2014. And Jerry Young, who as an attorney represents the Tucker family, who through Waller County Land and Cattle has donated conservation easements to Katy Prairie Conservancy on 600 acres in 2007 and 2008. And then my family donated an easement to the predecessor to Biolands Conservancy in 1996 on 478 acres, which is just west of the Freeman Ranch and just south of some of the Waller County Land and Cattle property. And let's see, I'm going to ask each member of the panel to give their experience on how it was to grant a conservation easement, how it has affected their land, and how they have worked with their respective land trusts. And Harvey, I thought I'd start with you. You sold an easement to NRCS in 2014, and what has been your experience?
Yeah, in 2014, our family, because it wasn't just me, it was my mother, myself, and also my aunt, my dad's sister, put part of our ranch, family ranch, into the land trust, to a conservation easement within RCS. So we're actually, our trust holder is USDA, not a private land trust. The experience overall has been positive. You know, it's, the monitoring and stuff is just like what was talked about earlier with the private land trust. Once a year they ask what's going on. We do have to have a conservation plan drawn up with our local NRCS office. We actually already had that before we ever went into the conservation easement, because we've been cooperators within NRCS since the 50s. So that was nothing new to us. The process, they were talking about how long the process takes. It took us 2 years to conclude the process, and that was 2 years before that was when we actually, you know, applied to be part of it. The first year we didn't score high enough to be accepted into the program. The second year, Congress didn't fund the program. And then the third year, we were accepted in the program. So, you know, you're dealing with the vagaries of the government from that standpoint.
Have you ever had any problems with the NRCS?
No, they probably had more problems with us during that discovery process of getting it done. When you've had property that's been in your family for years and acquired over long lengths of times, you run into some weird things in deeds in terms of mineral rights and stuff. And in general, we own most of the mineral rights on our properties, but some of the properties we only own half of them. But other than that, and then there was one tract that was going to go in with my cousins that turned out that there was an old bankruptcy that tied up the land, and that land actually didn't go in. So, but from our perspective, we didn't really have any significant problems.
If you were going to rewrite the easement, would you make any changes? Has anything been a problem in operating your ranch?
No, it hasn't. Now, in the program we went in under is actually more restrictive than most. It was the Grassland Reserve Program, which has since been folded into the ALE program. It essentially doesn't exist anymore. Under that program, we cannot farm the land, okay? We can ranch it. But we knew that going in, and we had farmed for years, but we quit farming rice in 1995, so that wasn't an issue. We knew what we were doing going in. I would just caution people that if you're doing this and you have those types of restrictions, plan for it ahead of time. As was talked about earlier, we pulled out a couple of 5 to 10 acre tracts as potential home sites. If my kids or if they have grandkids decide to sell at some point in the future, the land can be divided some way that the easement passes through, but there's room to make improvements on small places. The other thing I would caution when you do that, depending on the terms of your easement, if you hold out land for that, you also have to make sure you're holding out a utility easement to get electricity to it, and potentially a road easement to get to it, because depending on the terms, you're not allowed to do those things. But, you hold out the 40-foot easement to get to the property, you just don't put it in the trust. As long as you're not chopping the property up, I'm talking about doing 3 sites on 900 acres, not 50, okay? It shouldn't be a problem.
Well, Derek, I'll ask you the same question. I know your wife was more involved in negotiating the easement than you were, and I'm sorry she's not here.
Yeah, I wish she was here too.
Have you all had any problems with your easement since you granted it in 2005? And I know Katy Prairie Conservancy holds your easement.
No, we've had no problems at all. I see Wes once a year and we talk, and Wes is a good friend of mine, and it's very painless.
Do you all have building sites on your range?
Yeah, we do. We have 3. 2 existing houses that can be rebuilt, and then one that's out in the hayfield for a future house that one of our kids want to build or something.
What size are your building sites?
It's hard to remember. A couple acres, 5 acres maybe.
Did you reserve an easement to your building
I think
site?
we did. I hope we did. I know I talked with Missy a little this morning about negotiation. It's been so long. It's been like 2005, or it took like 3 years, which was pretty painful. But like you said, we obviously got it right, because now it's very simple, the year-to-year process. But we deal very little with Katy Prairie Conservancy, and they don't get in our business, and we can do everything we were doing before, and I think that was one of the problems she said, was there were a lot of I don't know where y'all got your contract that y'all presented to us initially, but there were a lot of things that kind of restricted some of the things we could do, or it would make it more painful each time we wanted to build something, or fix a fence or whatever, that we had to ask permission, and we kind of took some of those things out so we could just keep operating and not have to be going back and forth all the time.
What kind of business do you all have on the range?
I have a horse boarding facility, and of course a cattle operation, and a hay production operation. So it's pretty simple.
Well, good.
I know.
And Jerry, how about you? Have the Tuckers had any problems with their easement since 2007 and 8?
No, the relationship with KPC, and again, KPC holds our easement as well, has gone very well. As a matter of fact, as opposed to painless, we certainly experienced some benefits out of the relationship. the 5,800 or so acres that the Tucker family owns, of it, I think approximately 1,500 are in the easement. There's the 600 that's down towards your property on the south side, but I think we have some more spread out south to north, basically headed from I-10 up to 290. And on that 5,800 acres, we have a golf course. We have various grazing leases and farming leases, and lots of ponds and water to fish on, and to shoot ducks and do duck hunting, and really just enjoy the Katy Prairie. And we haven't experienced any limitations on that because of our relationship with KPC. As a matter of fact, one of the things, talking with Brad Tucker, that he thinks is a very positive part of the relationship is that you actually have an extra set of eyes out there, really it's Wes, that sees what's happening on the various properties. And it's not just management from the grasses and the birds and the streams, but when we have fences wash out or other things go wrong with our properties, we actually get a call from either Tom or Marianne or Wes saying, hey, I just wanted you to know about this. So we actually, besides the tax part of it, which obviously is very good, we've got a great relationship with KPC. You know, we've had a couple of bumps here and there. That when we told the gun club that they could use our property for a clay hunt, that was something that really we needed to discuss with KPC before we said we could, and it just kind of came up. But now KPC was great. They said, look, you guys fine, let's do it this one time, but future ones, let's get together first and talk about it. But no, the relationship's been great, and the Tucker family, they're committed not really to the land that they buy out there at this point. They're really looking to protect. They're trying to keep it from being developed. So our goals in KPCs are very much in line. We're not really concerned about putting a new house or doing any construction.
Do you all have any building sites on your conservation easement?
So just for everybody's benefit, I became general counsel for Waller County Land and Cattle 2 years ago. So I really had to educate myself on the relationship, as well as the 17 or so individual properties that we have in our 5,800 acres. So I'm familiar with the 600 that's over next to the shooting club. I'm not even sure, to be perfectly honest, where the other 900 are under conservation, but I can promise you that there are I don't think there's anything that's on them. I think that they are mostly rice fields and duck ponds. So.
Okay. Well, let's see. As far as our family goes, we did an easement. We did an easement in 1996, and we were partially motivated for tax benefits because we had sold some of our land and had a gain, so we wanted to shelter that gain. But we also wanted to preserve the property. It had been in our family since the mid-60s, and we spent a lot of time out there on the weekends and have big family gatherings on Thanksgiving and Christmas, so we wanted to preserve the property. We also do a lot of duck hunting, and so we've maintained the wetlands and improved it, and having a conservation easement on the property helped that. In addition, because we had a conservation easement on our property, when they built Katy Mills Mall, they needed a 20-acre wetland mitigation project, and so they built that project on our property and drilled a big well and brought in electricity. So from that perspective, it was a major benefit for us. Cypress Creek runs through the middle of our property, so it, of course, during Harvey, I think we had 5 feet of water flowing down the middle of the range. Fortunately, our improvements stay dry. And as far as getting along with Biolands Conservancy, they do come out once a year, and audit our property. They count, there's a limitation on how many cattle we can have on the property. And one time I was entertained by the fact that in the early days there was a guy who didn't know the difference between an animal unit and a steer or anything. And he was out there counting the cattle with a pair of binoculars. But fortunately, we've been very careful to limit the amount of cattle we have, and we're required under our easement to rotate them from various pastures so that the creek pasture doesn't get eroded. Let's see, are there any questions? Well, I'm glad we answered. Oh, there.
For those of you who have heirs to the property, how do your kids or heirs to the property feel about the conservation easement? How have you communicated the restrictions to them, that next generation of landowners?
I have 5 kids, and I guess one of the reasons I actually did it initially was because I kind of wanted them to be stuck with it and figure out what to do with it, right? To learn to be outdoors, be real people, learn life and death, you know, all the stuff I learned that really makes me a better person now, a more whole person. You know, I learned a lot of stuff growing up out there that kids nowadays don't learn, and I want my kids to, you know, experience that. They ride 4-wheelers, and you know, my 14-year-old, for the first time just a couple weeks ago, said, "Dad, do we have a big lake out there? Could we build a big lake out there?" And he was thinking about it, right, for the first time. And I said, "No." I said, "But when you get older and you like become a lawyer and make a lot of money," I said, "you can build your own, right?" And build a house next to it. And he was kind of like, "Oh yeah." So yeah, that's a major reason I wanted to do it, was so my kids would have a place, like, because to me it's, I mean, a lot of people say to me, like, well, oh, one day y'all can sell that and y'all will be rich, you'll have a bunch of money, right? And I mean, growing up there and even being there now, I cherish it more than I ever have, because my dad was there and my mom was there, and you know, I guess now you start to realize all the hard work they did, and so I want my kids to you know, experience that and get to you know, be there and one day, you know, have that heritage. It's, you know, it's a legacy to me. It's as a Freeman. I mean, we've been in Katy since 1898, so it's a legacy, and I want them to realize that they have something special, you know. So hopefully they will. You know.
Yeah, from our perspective, my wife and I have 2 kids. When we started this process, our kids were already in their 20s, so they were young adults already. We discussed it before we ever went into it. They think it's a great idea too. You know, the primary reason we got into this was, how can I politely put this? I'm not a big fan of urban sprawl. That's about as polite as I can put it. So, and that's, you know, that's the main reason we did this. And fortunately, even though both my kids live in Austin and have non-ag related careers, they share those same values, and they may at some time come back to the place. We'll see. And certainly that's what my mother thought too, and even my aunt. And my aunt does not live in the area. She lives in Austin, and her kids, well, unfortunately my one cousin died of cancer last year, but she has kids, and my other cousin, he lives in Wyoming, but they were all okay with it, you know, with their mother doing it. This was all we had a big family meeting before we ever applied to discuss, and I laid out, this is what you can do, this is what you'll get paid, and this is what you can do with it going forward. And you just have to have that communication.
The Tucker family has 3 siblings, and between them, I believe 4 children. I can tell you that the 2 that I work with are tremendously supportive and in favor of having land in the Conservancy. As far as development, the family has property that's not in the Conservancy, and some of it's designated for future building for homes for any of the grandchildren that decide that they're going to build a house out there at some point. But what makes it unique in having that additional property that's in the Conservancy is that the family knows that that's not going to get developed, and it's going to be there in its natural state for the things that really all of these kids love to do, because it's really fostered their appreciation for the outdoors, and whether it's hunting, fishing, or just enjoying nature. So they love it, and they actually, I know that Sam and perhaps Ben spend a lot of time trying to help with the improvements of the prairie, so that it stays in the way that it is. The other thing is that we kind of have the benefit that from an estate purpose, that when it passes, it's probably going to pass through the company itself, because Waller County Land and Cattle is actually owned by Mustang. So it's a subsidiary, so we really don't have to worry about that. So, we've got enough property out there where the kids are certainly in favor of it, and it sounds like these gentlemen have prepared for that too, where there's some property left over so that the kids can develop. And so you kind of pick and choose.
As far as our family goes, usually on Thanksgiving and Christmas, we get about 50 people out there to sort of celebrate our family, and we always drink several toasts to the perpetual protection of the ranch. We're also very fortunate. The Freemans are our neighbors on our east side, and the Tuckers are our neighbors on the north side. So we feel comfortable being out there. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
You mentioned some restraints on your restrictions for your rotation. Are there any other cattle management practices that panelists can talk about? Can you spread broad leads, improve pastures, et cetera, et cetera?
Y'all want to talk about that? On our place, we've agreed to manage our cattle according to the NRCS rules, and have had a plan put together to manage our herd, and fortunately it fit right in with our easement. So KPC is okay with that.
You want to talk about any cattle restrictions?
We don't have any.
I mean, again, as long as it's following the NRCS guidelines with us, I mean, because we got behind for about 25 years, I'm in a constant battle with mesquite and weesash, and it's, they're happy to see me clear it off there. It's supposed to be grassland, so, that's one of my biggest headaches, and it has nothing to do with the easement. It's just fighting the brush.
I don't think we've got any. I think, yeah, and on our easements, I think that if we've got any grazing, it's pretty light. But I can't recall if our easement agreement even has restrictions regarding cattle. It hasn't been a problem certainly since I've been managing it. So
I don't know. West of them, a problem with cattle.
Basically, our easements specify the same sort of thing that all NRCS grazing guidelines. And in the case of the Tucker easement, it is natural habitat, so we don't want them plowing up prairie that's out there. But brush control, that sort of stuff is definitely permitted, because we want it to stay prairie. We don't want it to turn into
did scold me for tallow trees, I think, one year.
Yes.
You know, as a general rule, a conservation easement tries to protect the, quote, conservation values of your property, and that's a defined term in the easement. And so, with regard to cattle grazing, as long as the conservation values of the property are not hurt by the level of grazing, then it's not a problem. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Have any of y'all ever had the opportunity to try to renegotiate part of a conservation easement, say years after it's been in place? And I don't mean ask permission for a clay shoot, I mean, hey, we were gonna be able to split it up 10 times, we're willing to only split it up twice if we can put a lake in the right area, or something that actually changes the easement, but we give and take on what the conservation value.
You know, my experience as a lawyer that works with conservation easements, the ability to amend an easement is getting harder and harder and harder. The IRS doesn't like it a bit. There are several cases that have held that if you amend the easement, it basically defeats the purpose of the easement, because land that was protected is no longer protected. So amending an easement is very difficult from the IRS perspective. And like, for example, the Nature Conservancy won't agree to an amendment at all. And I'm not aware of, I've been doing conservation easements for 20 years, and I've only done one amendment.
What if it wasn't even substantial? What if you agreed to a 5-acre area for a building envelope and then just move that 5 acres? Would that be considered a real change, or would that?
Depends. I mean, the answer is.
Laurie?
I was gonna say, it depends. So these things do happen, it's possible. The kind of general rule is there needs to be a net gain in conservation in any kind of exchange like that. And there was a recent IRS case where that exact thing, the relocating of a building, although it was like they denied the deduction, but I think they just, the appeals court overturned that recently. So, so making that a little easier to do. But from the land trust perspective, if you're moving it, it needs to be to some other place that isn't going to be, you know, more detrimental to the whatever the resources that are being protected. I mean, if there really is no big deal, I mean, you may even ask for a, and there generally no net loss at the conservation value. If there's a net gain, it makes it a little more palatable to do the amendment. But it's, you know, time and money and, you know, everyone's part, and so they don't, people don't go into them lightly, and certainly if you donate an easement, the IRS is a little stickly about it.
No, if you want to have flexibility in your easement, you need to negotiate it into the easement when you grant the easement, so that it's not an amendment, it's just, you know, following the provisions of the easement. Yes.
Yes, Mr. Kelsey, could you provide some guidance on identifying a lawyer that might specialize in conservation? In this particular case, this is North Carolina. The property is located in North Carolina, not in Texas. And I did some research, and I was unable to really find any information easily.
I can barely hear you. Are you asking about North Carolina conservation easement?
Yeah, so could you provide some guidance on an individual that would try to select a lawyer, maybe that specializes in land conservation, in the state of North Carolina? Because when I did some research on, you know, just internet research, I wasn't able to identify it when I read it up. So could you provide maybe some guidance on that?
Go ahead, Laurie.
So I used to work in North Carolina. The Conservation Trust for North Carolina is a statewide group, and they do provide resources like that. So I would go to their website.
Yeah, as a general rule, the Land Trust Alliance, which is sort of the mother organization of all land trusts in the United States, you might contact the Land Trust Alliance. You can look at their website and try to get some advice on lawyers. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Can you give us a sense of what are the costs to the property owner to set up an easement conservation?
Well, as a general rule, you're going to have sort of the basic expenses. You're going to have legal fees, appraiser fees, which is, if it's a donated easement, that's a critical part of the transaction. There is a stewardship contribution, which each land trust has their own policies regarding a fund, with sort of an endowment to make sure the property is protected, and it has a little bit of legal defense fund in it. As a general rule, Laurie, can you speak to this? What would you say the standard provision cost of an easement are?
So it varies. I was just talking to somebody about this. I mean, it really depends on depends on the land trust that you work with. Each land trust sort of has their own way that they calculate what their stewardship endowment is typically required. So that's one thing that the landowner needs to make, is that stewardship contribution at the time that the easement is conveyed. And so that is a variable range, but you know, and maybe say $10,000 to $30,000 would be an estimate. And then there's appraisal, survey, all those things. So it can be quite expensive. There are some of these grant programs that cover those costs. So we have a small grant program that helps cover those costs, or at least match, you know, cover half of them. So there's some help out there for landowners who are trying to do these things to cover those transaction costs, because they're not, you know, they are significant.
Ours typically range between $25,000 and $40,000 from a landowner contribution standpoint. And those are sometimes negotiable depending on if you're donating the easement versus us purchasing it from you. But I think what's important for a landowner to request what that contribution is going to be used for, have it itemized out, so we can provide you why it's important that these financial contributions are made upfront and what they're going towards.
And the
So
steward.
this is one-time contribution?
Correct, so the stewardship contribution is a one-time contribution, essentially. And in other parts of the country, they have worked out sort of like a payment over time, sort of legal payment, you know, over a number of years to get to the amount that's needed. But the idea is that in that sum of money that is contributed, that becomes part of the land trust stewardship endowment, and then upon that, you know, from that money, they can do their monitoring and their enforcement, you know, in perpetuity off of the, you know, interest income, if you will, of that amount of money as it grows over time. So that's the sort of rationale behind it, and it goes towards the monitoring, goes towards legal defense, all these things. So, land trust, we have a conservation easement defense insurance program now, so land trust can buy sort of per easement policies for legal defense of these easements in case they ever get a violation and they have to go to court. We have a great system in place now that provides up to like $500,000 in legal defense fees for an easement. So there's a lot of things that money goes towards and helps to ensure basically the viability of your easement and the protection of those conservation values over time.
You know, one thing you should consider is getting to know which land trust is active in your area. And there are a few statewide land trusts that will take an easement anywhere in the state of Texas. And then there are some regional land trusts, like the Katy Prairie Conservancy, basically focuses on the Katy Prairie. But you ought to go to the Texas Land Trust Council website, and it's got a list of all the land trusts that operate in Texas. And you can contact them through that website, and then just find one that you're comfortable with, depending on where your property is and how you want to negotiate the deal. It's really negotiable. You know, a stewardship contribution has a little bit to do with how much the land trust wants an easement on your property. And if they detect, you know, that there's some competition going on between one land trust or another, sometimes you can negotiate a little better. I generally represent landowners on easements as opposed to land trusts, although I've done both. But the landowners tend to pay better.
you have water rights, and did you have to give any of those up to the easement?
The question is, are there water rights involved? And, you know, water has become a more valuable item these days. And as a general rule, I would say most land trusts are going to say, are going to prohibit any sale, commercial sale of the water on your property. And certainly you can't divert your water supply so that negatively affects your conservation values. But as a general rule, I wouldn't plan on selling subterranean water under your property.
But you can keep the water rights.
You can
in
keep
the
the-
family, so to
Yeah, oh
speak.
yeah, sure.
How about air rights? Air?
Air rights? Well, I haven't really thought much about air rights, but Harvey?
No, I was making a bad joke.
I mean, you know, like cell towers are frequently prohibited under an easement. I guess that's the closest I can get to air rights.
Since you want to put up a major sign, would it be a problem?
A sign?
Yeah.
No, I've seen restrictions on signs. And of course, power line easements, of course, most of those have condemnation rights, so that. Any more questions? Thank you very much.